Pockety, pockety, wockety, whack. Abracadabra, neck. Shrink inside.
Hello and welcome to episode 15 of Waly Gisnep's Animated Classics, the podcast where we are reviewing all of the so-called Walt Disney animated classics and refining them into our own list of Waly Gisnep's animated classics. Waly Gisnep, of course, being how Walt Disney's signature reads to a 4-year-old. My name's Ben, and joining me, as usual, is my good friend Liam. Liam, what film are we looking at this week?
This week, Ben, we are looking at the 1963 fantasy epic, The Sword in the Stone. Before we jump in, what was your history with this film?
I feel like I say this every other week, but this is one I watched a lot as a child and not a lot as an adult. So a lot of the imagery is very deeply ingrained for me, and I do have a lot of fond memories of very specific aspects of this film. That said, when I watched it more recently, I remember feeling structurally it's a little bit of a mess.
I'm in a similar position this time. I've watched this film probably a few dozen times in my life, and there was a good 25-year gap between some of the watchings.
And maybe there's a good reason for that. Well, let's dive right in then to The Sword in the Stone. My first comment on this film is, I don't know why, I always want to combine it with Beauty and the Beast. So either Beauty and the Stone or The Sword in the Beast. Or I seem to have it in my head that it's called The Sword and the Stone, which suggests there's no spatial relationship between the two of them. They're two completely disconnected objects.
Straight off from the credits, am I right in thinking this was the first film directed by Wolfgang Reitman, or have we had one previously?
I believe he co-directed 101 Dalmatians, but this is his first solo outing. I think we've mentioned him a couple of times on this podcast, as he's renowned as one of Disney's 9 old men and directed a series of famous sequences. I know, it's a weird way of categorising them. They are so called because they were the 9 key animators / business people / producers who formed a lot of the creative direction for the first 20 or 30 years of Disney. It does make them sound like either the mafiosa or the 9 mortals who received the rings of men.
This is probably as good a time as any to bring this up, but in doing my research of the earlier period of Disney, I feel I've been overlooking the role of Ub Iwerks a lot. He's been popping up, and I mentioned the role he had in the Xeroxing process used in 101 Dalmatians. But I looked into it and I didn't realise that he is basically the person who designed Mickey Mouse and was effectively Walt Disney's animating partner in the early days.
Is it a bit of a Jack Kirby, Stan Lee / Bob Kane, Bill Finger situation?
I was going to go with that episode of The Simpsons, but you've chosen much better real-life examples.
I mean, to be fair, that episode of The Simpsons is based on Walt Disney, so...
I think that episode is directly referencing Ub Iwerks. Yeah, it's just something I came across in my research, and I realised that I'd kind of been overlooking the name and dismissing... Well, not necessarily dismissing his role, but not really giving him the credit where it is due. I think he is the person who designed Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, which then Walt Disney was like, hey, let's take those ears and make them round. And look, it's a new character. Another note about the credits, I do believe this is the first time we are featuring songs from the Sherman Brothers. And you can tell there aren't many songs in this film, but they're all nonsense.
We do get some stone cold bangers coming later on, but yeah, this is very clearly their first outing. My main note about the opening credits, it's very weird, because we get the classic Disney storybook opening, fair enough, and we initially get a sort of jazzy number. It's no lyrics, just jazz music, and you're like, okay, it's the swinging 60s, fair enough. And then immediately it goes into this very medieval-style oldie English ballad, and I couldn't quite remember how this film started, so I was thinking, oh, and then is someone going to go, oh no, do away with all that? You know, and it's like, nope, we're just going to play this deadly straight. And it sets up that England is in trouble because they don't have a king. And the way they're going to settle that is whoever can pull the sword from the stone will become the King of England.
It's funny you say that you don't remember how the film started, because watching this today, the first 20 minutes felt like I was watching this film for the first time. in that I remembered none of it.
I was exactly the same. Now, full disclosure, this is one we recorded off television, so I don't think we had the entire opening recorded. So I was like, oh, maybe we didn't record that bit. But no, I just think it's very forgettable.
I've just realised I think our VHS was ripped straight from the TV as well. So I may be in a similar position here. Isn't it weird that used to happen? Just open piracy everywhere. It was like, oh, something's going to be on the TV. We'll record it. I suppose people do it now with their televisions do that, don't they? These days? I don't know. I haven't used a satellite.
Liam, you're making us sound so old. With our steam-powered VCRs and our laser discs. How does the film open then?
So the film opens with, as you said, an explanation that England is in crisis. The gods have left a sword in a stone, and whoever pulls it will be declared the King of England. And then we cut to Merlin the wizard in his weird little hut, talking to himself about a visitor who is due any moment.
I think in another time they would make this sequence slightly different. I don't think there's anything intrinsically creepy about it, but it is just an old man preparing for a small boy to visit. I was watching this with a friend, and his immediate comment on seeing Arthur was, why does the one true King of England have an American accent?
Well, that is a good segue to a new segment I'd like to introduce, called How Many Voice Actors Did They Get to Voice That One Character? That many? Really? Wow.
Oh boy, a new segment!
So Ben, how many voice actors did they get to voice Arthur? Or Wart, as he's known for 90% of the film.
I didn't tangibly notice any changes. He has a lot of Mowgli about him, but maybe that's just the way he's drawn as well, and the fact they shamelessly recycle animation from this for the Jungle Book. I'm going to say 2.
So for the character of Wart, they actually had 3 different child actors do the voice. And once you're aware of this, it becomes very painfully obvious. You might think, oh, working with child voice actors can be difficult, particularly one who is the lead of a film. You're going to need them for a lot of different recording days. Get different actors. They do this a lot on stage. If you've ever been to a stage play, the children are often played by multiple people across several days, because obviously expecting one child to do 8 performances a week would be excessive on top of, all of their schoolwork and everything else. So they rotate the children. So you reasonably getting multiple voice actors to do one character, it makes sense. The problem is it changes several times in the middle of the scene. And you're right, there is an American child who is not even attempting a British accent. There is an American child who can't do a British accent. And there's someone who I'm not sure if they're American or British, because it's fine, I suppose. But the point being is we don't just have one bad child voice actor, we have 3.
I increasingly feel the subtitle to this podcast should be Bloody Child Actors. Yeah, I don't know if it was a deliberate decision to make Arthur the protagonist in this. I mean, obviously it's the King Arthur legend, but in adapting this story, whether they were trying to appeal to boys a bit more, because it's a bit more knights and swords and sorcery and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, Arthur is not the most engaging protagonist in the world.
Well, this is actually adapted from a children's book, which tells the story of a young King Arthur. In adapting it, one thing that I find really quite irritating is the insistence on the name Wart. This comes from the book The Once and Future King, but as soon as a film is called The Sword in the Stone, and as soon as we're reminded of the Arthurian legend, we know that it's about King Arthur. So why did they insist on this whole Wart, 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 and then in the last 5 minutes they go, oh, actually his name's Arthur, as if it's supposed to be some reveal? We're just like, yeah, we know. I actually don't know anyone who refers to the protagonist of this film as Wart.
I think he's referred to as Arthur very early on, and then the rest of the film he's called Wart. Now, I can kind of accept that his adopted big brother Kay is a jerk to him and that's a disparaging nickname, but why does Merlin need to call him that?
The other weird thing with Merlin, and I really appreciated it watching it this time, is that Merlin is basically the genie.
You're absolutely right. I feel Merlin really sets the template for it. Obviously, he's just got limitless magic, and he doesn't break the fourth wall, but he makes a lot of references to modern culture. He clearly can travel through space and time. Really, the only thing that's missing from it is the celebrity aspect, I guess, and that recognisability. But yeah, he's just the template for the Genie 30 years earlier.
Are you saying Merlin should have been doing Arnold Schwarzenegger impressions?
Well, he can see through time, I guess. Guess that kind of works.
I always enjoy as well that whenever a character can see through time, they can only see through time so far as to when the audience will be watching. I was watching with a friend, and as soon as Merlin was showing off all his toys, like a steam-powered engine, to Arthur, she just said, "Now show him an iPhone."
I mean, maybe the get out clause, maybe I'm being too generous to the film here, is towards the end of the film when he says he's travelled to the 20th century and he's like, oh, load of modern rubbish. Maybe we can take that as he doesn't care about travelling much further in the future because it just gets on his nerves. I can't blame him.
Arthur stumbles upon Merlin's hut, and Merlin was expecting him. Merlin, along with his pet Archimedes, who I have to admit is probably a highlight of the film for me.
Yeah, he's just a really grumpy owl. To be honest, I think I share his general demeanour. I just want to be alone and asleep all the time, and I think everyone's always wrong.
So Merlin decides that he is going to give Arthur an education, and so he packs up and leaves for the castle, and immediately I do love the packing up scene. I think it's one of those moments that most people will remember from the film.
Yeah, he sings a little song/spell called Higatus Figatus, and he's ordering all his items and shrinking them down into one bag, and he tells them off a little bit and he's reordering them. It's just bibbidi bobbidi boo.
So Merlin and Arthur return to the castle where Arthur has been taken in by Lord Ector, and Merlin confronts Lord Ector and requests that he is able to give Arthur an education rather than him growing up to be a squire.
We also get a lot of Kay, who is Lord Ector's biological son. He's implied to be around the age of 19 or 20, and it made me realise that ginger characters in Disney films are always dicks.
Yes, I think that is true.
Until Merida, obviously.
She's Pixar though, so it doesn't count.
That's true. Although she's a Disney princess, let's not go down this rabbit hole.
Of this scene, one image, in fact, of the whole film, the one image that always comes to mind when I think of the sword and the stone, the sword in the stone.
It's easy to do.
The one image that comes to mind is Kay eating a turkey leg.
Now, if you haven't seen this film in a while or at all, this is a film that has dragons in, it has a jousting competition.
He's not even the main character.
He's just a jerk.
But he eats a damn fine turkey leg.
So as you say, Merlin convinces Lord Ector that he should be there and be around. Lord Hector's not really on board with it, but he doesn't want to say no to him because he can see he's a powerful wizard. He gives him what he calls the guest room, which is this rickety old tower with massive structural integrity problems, which Merlin sort of makes into his own home.
If I can go back to a topic that I quite enjoy of the language of cinema, I'm really disappointed that at no point in the film does the tower collapse.
Do you feel it's a bit of a Chekhov's gun? You see the tower wobbling all the time.
They're really setting it up to just be this very rickety, unsafe place, and that's the end of it. I do enjoy it, though. It is the quintessential wizard's tower.
I mean, in some ways, I feel that is a perfect metaphor for this film.
I can see that.
Once Merlin's settled in, and we get the arrival of Sir Pellinore, who informs Lord Ector that, by the way, it's called Ector without an H, that's not just us mispronouncing it. Sir Pellinore informs Lord Ector that they're going to hold a jousting competition on New Year's Day, which doesn't impress him. It would annoy me if it was on New Year's Day, but fine. And he says whoever the winner is will be crowned King of England. I don't think it's the best way. It'd be like saying whoever wins Britain's Got Talent becomes Prime Minister.
I just have the same note that the tournament to decide the crown is an odd choice. It's nice to see that they've given up on the sword and the stone. I don't know how long it's been there, that they've been in crisis so long that they say, fine, we'll resort to holding a tournament. Has it been a few decades? Has it been a few weeks? I don't know.
There's this guy Cromwell, and he keeps talking about voting or something, but we're not listening to him. I mean, the winner of that tournament presumably is going to have at least some cranial trauma following the number of times they'll have been smacked in the head. I'd say whoever comes last is probably the best person.
I have to admit, at least having some kind of competition is, at the very least, a better system than choosing it based on whose vagina you've came out of.
Yeah, I can't argue with that. Thank God we no longer have a monarchy in the UK.
So that, I think, is supposed to be the overarching plot, that in the distance we have this idea of a tournament, and the idea is that Kay will compete and Arthur will be his squire. But Merlin wants something better for Arthur, so he starts to train and educate him in very weird ways.
Yeah, so Merlin says what he's going to do is he's going to teach Arthur how to use his brain, and then that's somehow going to make him successful. Now, Arthur literally says, how's that going to help me? Because Arthur's aware that he's just orphan peasant boy. He's kind of looked out with Lord Hector, to be honest. He's not the nicest guy in the world, but, he looks after him and clearly cares about him a little bit. Like, it doesn't really matter if he can do maths if, he still lives in the stable or whatever.
I do enjoy that Arthur seems to understand how the horrible world that he was born into works, and is kind of just very accepting of his place in that.
I mean, it was the feudal system, to be fair.
He's got a good grasp on it, and he's like, okay, this is the lot I've been given. I'll make the most of it. I've found a really good master who takes very good care of me and basically treats me like a son. And I get to rise to the highest possible rank of someone of my birth at the time, a squire. He's set. And Merlin comes along and fucks it all up.
Well, that brings us neatly on to Merlin's first lesson. So he takes Arthur out for a walk around the moat, and he says, can you imagine yourself as a fish? And Arthur says, oh, that's easy. I've done that lots of times. And I was like, it's a bit weird.
Are you telling me you've never imagined yourself as a fish?
I've never imagined myself or anything else as a fish other than fish. Merlin says you've got to have an imagination, so clearly I don't have one.
I would say I have imagined myself as a fish, but it's only because I watched this film as a child.
I thought you were going to say, it's only because I watched the film Help, I'm a Fish.
Merlin decides that for today's lesson, he's going to turn both himself and Arthur into fish. And they're going to explore the moat and learn about the mechanics of being a fish and sort of see life from a different angle.
Even though there's some logic gaps, I do genuinely like this sequence. One thing I really like is that Merlin has like a little version of his glasses, whatever animal he turns into. That's just a really cute little touch. And I guess the point is that Merlin's teaching Arthur about biology and how different ecosystems work, but yeah, also getting a different perspective on stuff and not just working by instinct, but also looking at your scenario and reacting to it, which I think is a good lesson for a little medieval peasant boy.
There's a weird bit in this sequence, because you've mentioned instinct, where Merlin says, you might have the body of a fish, but you're still a human boy, so you don't have the instinct. You're going to have to learn to control this from the start. And there's a moment where he eats a bug by instinct. They actually comment on it. Merlin says, oh, that's your instinct, boy. And he says, I thought you said I didn't have any instinct. And then it's just dropped. And I still don't know whether Merlin was wrong and he does have instinct, or Arthur's instinct as a boy is to eat bugs.
Would explain why he's so skinny.
I agree, it's a really nice sequence. In fact, I said I didn't remember the first 20 minutes of this film. I think for most people, they tend to just remember the transformation sequences. And they are very good.
Yeah, we get another little song. Merlin sings about the balance of things, I guess is the point, that for every action there's a reaction, etc., which is, a law of thermodynamics. Although he doesn't explain it's that, but fine.
Also, the child tries to sing.
Yeah.
It's really not a very good singer. I don't know which of the three they had do the singing, but the other two must have been absolutely rubbish.
And then we get possibly the most angry-looking character in all of Disney, which is just a huge pike that lives in the moat. And it turns up and it is ready to kill.
The only note I have on this is that the pike is terrifying. Also, Merlin says this is an opportunity for you to learn and to show that brain can beat brawn. And I'm thinking brain beating brawn doesn't apply when you're being chased by a pike 20 times your size. Anything that can get me out of immediate danger, I will take. How does he even use the brain? How does this resolve? I can't remember.
The lesson goes in a bit. So first off, Arthur uses the chain that's linked to the bridge to trap the pike's mouth, and then he also sticks an arrow in its mouth to kind of stall it. And then Merlin's like, "Oh, you're doing great," and then just leaves him to die.
Oh yeah, and then he jumps out onto the castle wall. There's like an outcropping on the castle wall, and he's floundering and dying, and he has to be saved by Archimedes. So really, it was Archimedes beats Brawn.
Brains over brawn and also have an owl. That's today's lesson. After the lesson, Arthur excitedly rushes back to Lord Ector and tells him all about it. Lord Ector, despite having seen undeniable proof that Merlin is an actual wizard, refuses to accept Merlin may have turned Arthur into a fish.
The people in this film are so dismissive, even when they're confronted with actual evidence. This is a recurring theme in this film.
And as punishment, Arthur is made to do the washing up. Although it seems to be his job anyway, so I don't know if that's really a punishment, but fine.
I think the punishment was that they were going to produce extra washing up that night, because I'm not sure how many people live in this castle, but that is a lot of washing up.
It seems to be 5, including Merlin.
If by any chance you've not seen this scene, this is a very large room filled to the ceiling with dirty pots and pans.
Thousands. And Merlin shows up and he decides to modernise it and use a production line, which... So again, this is where I feel often the morals that are being communicated don't quite line up with what actually happens, because I feel what should happen in this film is Merlin maybe uses magic to inspire Arthur, and then Arthur comes up with a clever solution. So maybe because they learned about the ecosystem of fish, maybe he redirects water from the moat to get something powered or something. But no, Merlin just goes, "I'm going to magic all your problems away, let's go on an adventure and become a squirrel."
Now, Arthur is not the worst offender for this in the Disney catalogue. There is someone much, much worse at this. But he never achieves anything himself, and he never has a character arc or journey. The reasons for the end of the film exist at the start. Merlin says that he's a determined boy who will persevere and put his heart into anything he's set at. That's Arthur at the start of the film. All Merlin does across the film is get him into trouble. He doesn't really teach him or change him in any way.
Yeah, and this comes back to what I was saying about structure, in that I feel all these little adventures he goes on with Merlin, I think as self-contained sequences, they're very charming and very memorable, but it doesn't really contribute to an overall narrative. It's just some stuff that happens.
Of which the next bit of stuff is another transformation, and the person I was watching this with, this is their favourite part of the whole film, and that is the squirrel transformation sequence.
It's funny because the way Merlin starts this is Arthur's having to do his punishment, and Merlin comes in and goes, "Oh, you think you've got it bad? Try being a squirrel." So they are running about the trees and jumping and having a little bit of fun, and then Arthur bumps into a lady squirrel.
You can tell she's a lady squirrel because she's a slight shade of pink. Those famous pink squirrels.
I didn't know if it was a subtle comment that Merlin is a grey squirrel, because of course grey squirrels didn't exist in Britain at this point, and maybe he was like, "I am the doom of the red squirrel." So Liam, can you talk us through this bizarre sequence that follows?
So the start of the sequence seems to be Merlin trying to teach Arthur about the perils that squirrels face and how you've got to be patient and calculated and know your moves because you're constantly fighting against gravity. And it's when he mentions gravity and explains what it is that we're introduced to the female squirrel. So I assume they're going for something about laws of attraction, but the sequence just entirely derails at this point into a female squirrel endlessly chasing Arthur, who is currently in the form of a squirrel, just so everyone is on the same page here, while Merlin laughs.
Yeah, so I guess the point of the lesson is about attraction and, people can't change the way they feel and things like that. But yeah, Merlin's just being a jerk here. There's no real way around it. He's just like, hey, she likes you, what are you gonna do? There's a specific bit where Arthur's just getting, constantly groped by this squirrel, and he's like, Merlin, help, and Merlin's like, magic can't solve this problem. I'm pretty sure Merlin could stop Arthur being sexually assaulted by a squirrel, if he wanted to. Whilst this is going on, eventually another lady squirrel shows up and is rather into Merlin. And one just really sweet little moment I like is Merlin, he holds his squirrel tail and just has a little tuft pointing out, which he uses to gesture, which is exactly the same thing he does with his beard when he's a human, which is just a really nice little character quirk.
Does that mean that his beard transferred to his tail? Because I've often wondered, when it comes to transformations, if you were injured in some way as another being and you changed back, what would happen to the injury, particularly if it's an injury on a part of your body that you no longer have?
All right, David Cronenberg.
Let's say Merlin had the tip of his tail cut off and then turned back to a human. What would that look like? Would he just have a slight cut on his tailbone?
He does get his tail bitten off later in the film, so maybe not. Although I guess Merlin's like an old squirrel, and he's an old man, so maybe... I think we're giving it a lot more thought than they did.
Oh, definitely. So at this point, Merlin has had his comeuppance because he's been laughing at Arthur having to deal with the affections of a squirrel, and suddenly he's having to deal with the same. So out of frustration, Merlin, while he's being groped by this new female squirrel, immediately changes back to an old man, and she screams and runs away in horror. Having solved that problem, he can hear Arthur calling to him, and Arthur is being nuzzled on the other side of a log by this female squirrel. And so Merlin changes Arthur back to a boy, and we're treated to something I never thought would be in a film, which is a heartbroken squirrel.
Yeah, it's particularly odd, and Merlin's just like, oh well, there's nothing you can do. And it's like, Merlin, this is entirely your fault. That squirrel's probably going to die of loneliness.
And again, with this one, I'm not sure what the lesson was. It's just a problem created by Merlin and then solved by Merlin.
Again, this is where I feel what should happen narratively is that later on, Arthur encounters a situation where someone's acting based on their heart rather than their head, and he has to help them differentiate the two. But no, what actually happens is we cut back to Hector and Kay having a sword fight. Side note, they're using real swords and shields, and they're not wearing anything on their hands, not gloves or gauntlets. I was like, geez, these guys want to lose their fingers.
You can't be the next King of England if you've got all your fingers. It's the sign of a true swordsman.
So, whilst they're having this sword fight, the washerwoman runs in and says that her kitchen is bewitched. And Hector and Kay go in and see Merlin's automated dishwashing of all the dishes flying around and magically washing themselves. And their immediate reaction is to try and fight it.
I think they do quite a good job of building the character of these two. I'm always entirely clear what their motivation and how they will react will be. Yeah, so fighting the dishes doesn't go so well. And because Arthur had been skipping out on his chores, he gets into trouble and he starts shouting back at Hector, which just gets him in more and more trouble. And then Hector makes the decision that someone else will be Kay's squire instead. And this is now the low point for Arthur. Because again, the overarching narrative here is there's a tournament at the end of this film. Arthur does nothing to prepare for this tournament, and somehow that's where we're heading.
This is the only scene where Arthur really shows any emotion and he gets a bit upset. He's just not very engaging.
Correction. 2 child voice actors make attempts at showing their upset.
They also have an argument with Merlin, and twice in this scene he gets called an old goat, which I think is a nice little piece of foreshadowing for something that's going to happen shortly. I was like, oh, that's pretty good.
And I think Arthur, again, he's very upset because he knows the best he can hope for is being someone's squire, and all of his gallivanting with Merlin is ruining those chances. So Merlin becomes very stubborn and just refuses to teach Arthur anymore, and so the responsibility falls on Archimedes.
Yeah, Arthur says that he shouldn't have popped off, and I just sort of raised my eyebrow.
I've got the exact same note. But I was like, oh, I won't mention it.
No, we're not getting past that one. Merlin tries showing Arthur his globe, telling him the world isn't flat. It says the new world was discovered in 1492. I've added the quotation marks. And when Archimedes takes over, because Merlin's just being a sulky git, he finds out that Arthur can't read or write. So what I think is genuinely quite rational, Archimedes decides to teach him how to read and write. It's clear from the way Archimedes teaches him to write, he also taught Walt Disney how to handwrite, because his letters look nothing like what they're meant to be.
That chalkboard sequence I would just like to remove from the film, because the letters Archimedes has written, I don't know how Archimedes wrote these letters actually, but the letters he has written are wrong. The letters Arthur copies are hideous, and the sound it makes my skin crawl.
When you say the sound it makes, are you talking about Arthur?
Yes, and also the sound they do nails on a chalkboard. Oh, it's horrible.
But very quickly, Arthur gets distracted, and Merlin, seemingly just for laughs, turns him into a bird.
Merlin is determined to ruin this child's life.
One thing I really like is the weird relationship between Merlin and Archimedes, because I wouldn't say they dislike each other, but they don't really seem to get on. Like, in almost every scene, they're arguing with each other. It's just very strange.
I have a note that they are a bickering old married couple.
I mean, they kind of remind me of Jafar and Iago, to be honest.
Jafar and Iago get on, though. They have fun. They make comments and make each other laugh. These two just jab at each other constantly. So Arthur decides to fly. Merlin was going to show him, but then Archimedes very rightfully points out, you may have studied birds, but I am a bird. So they go into the air, start flying, and then, very reminiscent of the moat scene, a predator appears, because apparently the writer is fresh out of ideas.
Yeah, like, you get this weird thing in the opening that says, oh, the strong preyed on the weak, or something like that. And in that sequence, you see a wolf and a hawk and a squirrel, which obviously I guess is meant to be setting up this thing. There's a wolf that chases them throughout the film. We didn't mention it because it's not interesting. It's just a poor man's Wile E. Coyote. And yeah, and now this scene we finally get the hawk show up.
And so the hawk has shown up, so they have to immediately escape, and they do immediately escape. There is no real threat, it's not an extended sequence, luckily it's not dragged out, but the way they escape is by flying down a chimney into the house of Madam Mim.
Now, I suspect you probably echo these sentiments, Liam, but I think Madam Mim's fantastic.
No, I absolutely love Madam Mim. It's Granny again from 101 Dalmatians. Martha Wentworth doing a fantastic performance and just having a lot of fun.
Yeah, like, she gets a lot of genuinely funny lines about just being evil and being a jerk. And I love how Arthur just immediately tells her, oh, I'm a boy and I'm friends with Merlin. And it's just like, come on, Arthur, have a sense of threat. I mean, to be fair, he's only probably met about 6 people in his life, so... And this leads into Madam Mim singing a little song about herself, calling herself Madam Mim, which is just a very fun little sequence. She shows all the nasty things she likes to do. She makes herself very big, she makes herself small, she makes herself more ugly, she makes herself beautiful, scary.
I'm glad you added the question mark there.
So she turns into a cat to eat Arthur, but her exact words are, destroy him.
Yeah, she's great. She's just a nice presence in the third act. I wish she'd had a larger role in the film in general. She could have been set up earlier in some way. But quick to his rescue, Archimedes has gone to get Merlin to come and save him. Because once again, Arthur never does anything to save himself. He gets into trouble because of Merlin, and he's rescued by Merlin.
Yeah, it's a real shame. I think in some ways Madame Mim, one of the reasons she works is it's a bit of less is more, in that she has this one sequence where she's just this mad character. And I think she stands out because she's not another maleficent evil witch, even a bit of Lady Tremaine. She's just this weird little woman who lives in a shack shaped like a witch's hat. Just a really nice little bit of visual storytelling. When Arthur falls through a chimney, she's just sat playing solitaire by herself with a deck of cards. She's just bored. I really like that.
She very much feels like a foil to Merlin, and as far as I'm concerned, she doesn't do anything more harmful than Merlin's ever done.
I mean, Merlin never actively tries to destroy Arthur. Not by his own hand, anyway.
Just picturing him whispering to Archimedes before every transformation, I'm going to destroy this boy.
And this leads into almost certainly the most memorable sequence from this film, the Wizard's Duel. And I'm just going to say, I think the sequence is awesome. I love it.
This sequence is excellent. Similar to what we said with Lady and the Tramp, if you take out the date scene from Lady and the Tramp, you would have one of the best shorts that Disney's ever created. And I think the same can be said for this. You can just take it out, and in isolation, it is excellent to watch.
If you don't remember or you haven't seen it, the premise is that Mim and Merlin are going to have a wizard's duel, and they have to turn into different animals to try and outsmart each other and counteract what the other's turning into. It's incredibly creative. I think there's about 15-20 different things they turn into, and it's very reactive. They do a lot of nice things with the environment, but also it's really good characterization of the two. So Mim just turns into big predators and big dangerous animals, whereas Merlin kind of thinks his way around it a little bit more. So she turns into an elephant, so he turns into a mouse, for instance. She gets stuck in a tree at one point, so he turns himself into a goat to ram her off a cliff. And the climax is when she thinks she's caught him, he turns into a germ to make her ill. It's great. Like, I honestly think it's one of the best sequences Disney have produced. I don't think the animation is the strongest ever, but I do think its creativity and its charm just carry it all the way.
Creatively, it is fantastic. I enjoy the rules they set out at the start, stating that it has to be animal and not vegetable or mineral. And I'm wondering if that rule wasn't in place, would either of them have chosen, a carrot or a rock?
Maybe they were just to stop them turning into, like, chlorine and just poisoning the other.
And obviously they have the rule of no pink dragons or anything, which Mim twists. I don't know why she twists and becomes a purple dragon, because every other rule up to this point she's broken. She disappears. She doesn't turn into a rock, but she does disappear, which was one of the rules. So why would she be bothered about turning into a pink dragon?
Yeah, she just wanted to kill Merlin. Just start with the dragon. If you're going to cheat anyway.
Immediately disappear and reappear as a dragon.
Yes.
So that's the Wizard's Duel. If you're not familiar, genuinely look it up and check it out. It is fantastic. And as quickly as Madame Mim has came into the story, she's left to be ill. Though on that point, going back to what happens to, let's say, Merlin changed into a squirrel and loses a bit of his tail. The way diseases work is they multiply and they breed within you, and it causes immune responses. So the fact that he became a germ and infected her means that he must have spread throughout her body. When he changed back, was he leaving part of himself in her system?
Why are you so fixated on this weird aspect of it?
I just want to know the rules of changing into things and what happens when you change back.
There's lots of existential questions in Beauty and the Beast. There's a lot in Aladdin. We'll come to them, I promise.
So at this point, the film remembers that it was supposed to have a plot and was supposed to be working towards something, and we resume the tournament. But of course, before we can go to the tournament, Kay's going to need a squire. His squire has fallen ill, and so Arthur is chosen to be his squire. Excitedly, because this is all Arthur's ever dreamed of, he goes to tell Merlin, and Merlin responds angrily with something that I don't believe is a phrase, with blow me to Bermuda. Is that a thing people say?
I really don't know. I've mean, I like the reaction is Arthur goes, "Where's he gone?" And Archimedes goes, "Bermuda, I suppose." That's genuinely very funny. As you say, Arthur gets replaced as Kay's squire by Hobbs, and then Hobbs falls ill with the mumps, so Arthur goes. At no point do we see Hobbs, and there's no implication that anyone else lives in this castle. I'm going to assume Hobbs is either imaginary or an inanimate object of some kind. And it's like, oh, you're taking the broom?
Now the broom has the mumps.
And pretty much just like that, we cut to the tournament. London is drawn in a way that's very clearly strongly influenced by Sleeping Beauty. Lots of tall, colourful towers and buildings. It doesn't look as good as Sleeping Beauty, but I do think it still has a certain charm to it.
The backgrounds are fairly inconsistent in this film. So animation style, we still have use of the Xeroxing, so you'll see some sketch lines on characters, and the backgrounds will have the powdery look of the photocopier. But unlike 101 Dalmatians, instead of being completely block filled with just rectangular shapes of colour, they tend to follow the lines a bit more, and it feels more of an artistic decision. I still don't like it, but it is a step in the right direction, and I think by the next film they've kind of nailed the process for how to do backgrounds with this method. But yeah, London looks good. It's some of the better backgrounds in the film. As I say, they're fairly inconsistent in this film.
During the tournament then, Arthur realises he's left Kay's sword at the inn, and he rushes off to grab it.
He's absolutely useless.
He is. I guess Merlin didn't get around to teaching him to-do lists, or how to do an idiot check when you leave a hotel room.
What animal would they have had to change into for that lesson?
Mole? I don't know.
I think that's the point, is if it's not something you can learn by turning into an animal, you can't learn it.
Surely the squirrel, maybe that was the lesson he was going to teach. The squirrels have to leave stuff somewhere and then remember where it is. Maybe that's what he was trying to teach, but yeah, then he got interrupted.
So Arthur runs back to get the sword from the inn, but the inn is locked. They've all gone to the tournament, and he spots in the church courtyard there's a sword in a stone just sitting there, so he decides he'll just take that. And there's this nice little sequence where he goes to take it, and there is a ray of light and a choral singing every time he sort of approaches it, and when he withdraws it will disappear. And then ultimately he decides he really needs a sword. He'll deal with the choral singing, grabs the sword, pulls it out, and runs back to the tournament.
On returning, he gives the sword to Kay, who's just like, yeah, whatever. And then Lord Ector looks at it and realises it's the sword in the stone. Everyone is shocked and asks where Arthur got it. He said he pulled it out, and they all laugh and laugh and laugh, and they go, all right then, prove it.
He's got the sword in his hand. Like, what more do you want?
The only other alternative is that someone else took it out and just gave it to him, in which case, why would they do that? Or someone else took it out and Arthur killed them and stole the sword. Which of those three do they think is the most probable?
And so everyone heads back to the church courtyard, somehow to prove that this has happened. They see the sword is missing from the stone. They see that the sword is in Arthur's hand, and yet they're like, nope, still not good enough. So Lord Ector puts the sword back, and they ask Arthur to withdraw it. But obviously, at this point, Kay says, look, once it's been pulled out, anyone can pull it out. Goes to do it, can't pull it, it's stuck tight again, just to establish that that's how the magic of this works. And so everyone starts arguing, everyone jumps onto the sword, trying to pull it out of the stone, but we are interrupted by the most booming voice ever. It's our old friend Thurl Ravenscroft again, commanding everyone in the crowd to let the boy try.
Of course, when Arthur does it, it comes out again. They realise he is the true king of England. Everyone kneels to him as king. I just feel this undermines the whole point of the film. Okay, we can dispute how useful Merlin's lessons are, but the principle is that Merlin's trying to teach Arthur how to think about things rather than just go with the flow, rather than just put up with what's going on, but to question stuff. But Arthur doesn't do anything to get this sword. It's just, oh, and he was the chosen one, so he pulled it out, great. Like, he doesn't do anything clever to do it. It's just, that was his fate, and wha-bam, he gets it. It just feels so underwhelming.
This was my point, is at the start of the film, we are told by Merlin that that boy has excellent qualities. He will persevere and put everything into any task he's set to. And those qualities are what make him a worthy king. Merlin does nothing to foster that. At no point point in the film does Arthur use those skills to get himself out of trouble, again, trouble that Merlin is always getting him into. He could have pulled the sword out of the stone at the start of the film, and everything in between is superfluous nonsense.
Well, genuinely, yeah. I mean, we often talk sometimes about sections of these films we think should be cut, but honestly, I feel if this film had another 15 minutes or so, just building that character a little bit and having Arthur have a bit more of an arc, it would probably be more satisfying, because literally we then cut. Arthur has been given the crown of England, and he's in some palace. I don't know where he's meant to be.
It's the Palace of Westminster.
But what seems to have happened is the crowd have, presumably lifted him high above and carried him across, plonked him on the throne, given him the crown, and then they've all gone outside to shout about how much they love him, just leaving him inside, right, you're the king, you'll figure it out.
I am genuinely at a loss for how this country has managed to run itself whilst they had no king, because clearly the people are idiots.
And then Merlin rocks up. There's some fun little stuff where he says he's been to the 20th century and it's all modern tosh and all that, and he's gonna help Arthur become the King Arthur of legend, and he'll have a round table, and that's it. The film just ends. That's it.
My last note is just the film just ends. And if you're watching it on a streaming service, it will go to a small box before the last character has finished talking.
Wow. I don't think I can pass better comment than that. That's incredible. That's it, really. I absolutely love the tone of it. I feel the idea of it, of this time-travelling, omniscient Merlin teaching Arthur about all this stuff and it being kind of a bit of a twist on Arthur, I think is really fun. I think Merlin is a really, really fun character. He feels very unique compared to classical depictions of the character, but just in terms of Disney characters in general, until the Genie, obviously. It's a world I really, really love losing myself in and the charm of it, but in terms of structure and narrative, I was going to say it's a mess. It's not a mess. Stuff's just not there.
I think the problem lies in the source material. You've often said to me that every children's author for the last 70 years has just been trying to write The Hobbit again. And one thing The Hobbit does really well is you get to explore a world through a series of chapters that each one is its own little story that you can read to kids at bedtime. And they're all independent of each other. However, they are connected by this overall plot of we need to get to the mountain. And everything is taking them closer to the mountain, but along the way, they're having lots of little adventures. A lot of children's books tend to just do this idea of every chapter's a little adventure, and this feels like the Once and Future King is that. It's just lots of little adventures of Merlin and the Wart, but it's missing the overall narrative thread that ties it all together. I think the character of Merlin is fantastic and elevates the film far beyond everything in it. But the end result, to me, is that this is probably Disney's best package film, in that it's lots of little sequences, and unlike all of the previous package films, there's actually common theming and framing device, but that framing device isn't a narrative.
I think that's a really fair assessment of it. You can watch the three main sort of adventure transformation sequences in isolation, and they're very charming and you'll have fun with them. But in terms of a piece of cinema, yeah, it doesn't really hold together.
There is one thing, and I'm worried we may disagree on this point. So Ben, we need to decide, out of all the characters in The Sword and the Stone, who is the sexiest character? So Ben, in all of this film, who is the sexiest character?
Okay, I feel there's two contenders here, and I feel very weird about both of them.
I feel there's only one, and I feel extremely weird about it.
Well, okay, so I'd say my secondary choice would be the First Lady Squirrel, because, again, just to be clear, we're going from a sexualised character, and she has the big eyelashes. She wouldn't be out of place as being the girl version of a Bambi character. But it's probably, quote-unquote, beautiful Madam Mim with her weird dimensions and creepy big face.
I don't consider Madam Mim in the running, because that transformation, there's something non-Euclidean about her proportions, and it scares me. So my vote is firmly with the First Lady Squirrel.
God damn it. A film mostly full of human characters, and once again, we've picked a sexy mammal.
My question is if you were in that situation where you'd been turned to a squirrel, and there was a squirrel that was clearly obsessed with you, and is evidently the sexiest character in the film, would you stay a squirrel?
I don't know if there's an answer to that, though. puts any of us in a good light, Liam. My vote is going with Sexy Madam Mim, and I'm leaving it there.
Well, my vote is going for Sexy Squirrel and also remaining a squirrel.
That leaves us only one more item of business then, and that is, of course, looking at whether The Sword in the Stone is worthy of going on the list of Waly Gisnep's animated classics.
Since we're in the Xerox era, I've actually brought out a special photocopied version of the list for us to write onto, and then if it goes on, we'll just photocopy it back onto the other list. The end result will be hideous, but I think that's appropriate. So Ben, I don't think I need to ask, but do you think The Sword in the Stone deserves a spot on Waly Gisnep's animated classics?
I enjoyed watching this film a huge amount. I feel it's got so much charm and character, but that's not enough. And unfortunately, for me, it's going to be a no. But I want to be clear that this one I enjoyed a lot more than I thought I was going to as well. It really does pull me in. But yeah, I want to be clear, I don't put it in the same bracket as 101 Dalmatians or Lady and the Tramp. But yeah, it's just a bit too flawed to make the list for me.
I have to agree. I genuinely love this film. As I say, it's one of the films I've watched more than any others in my life. And regarding the 4-year-old test, it would pass with flying colours. I will happily sit down with a 4-year-old child. My 4-year-old child. My fictional, currently non-existent 4-year-old child. This is getting weird. I'd sit down with that child and watch this every Saturday for as many Saturdays as they would like, because it is incredibly enjoyable. Is it a good film? Not even close.
But of course, that's just our opinion. Do you think the merits of The Sword and the Stone outweigh the flaws? Do you feel that the structure works as a stylistic decision? What are your thoughts on it? Which are your favourite transformation sequences? And of course, we always want to know which you think the sexiest characters are in this film.
And with that, Ben, what are we going to be taking a look at next time?
Next time, Liam, we are looking at 1967's The Jungle Book, which I would probably say, of the last few films we've looked at, is almost certainly the most beloved of them.
Once again, this is going to be one of the films where I not only have the VHS, but I've completely worn it out, so I'm very excited to revisit this one, because it's been a few years.
Thanks for that, Liam. So join us again next time, where we'll be looking at The Jungle Book, and in the meantime, please let us know what you thought of The Sword in the Stone.
Magnificent! Marvellous! Mad, 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 mad! Madam Mim!